So in a previous video I mentioned my 16 key layout, and a lot of you are really interested in that and what kind of things I'm doing to pull that off. So in this video I'm going to do a deep dive and look at that layout in detail, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas. And you may not want to go that far, and in fact I'm not quite sure if I'm going to stick with this. And I'll mention this in the video, but there's a couple of sort of things that I think another thumb key or two thumb keys might be really beneficial. So I'm going to explore that in this video too, whether this is the point that's too far, or obviously I don't think there's any point in going any further. I don't think I'm going to go any further. I'm only going to go back now. But it's amazing to have got this far, and obviously the benefit, reducing all that finger movement is fantastic. Just really hardly moving my fingers now, and that's amazing. That's kind of always what I've really wanted to try and get to with this keyboard journey. So the first of my kind of small layouts was the 36 key layout, and that was really kind of intended for the Gurgoplex. I actually experimented with it on the Moonlander and the Planck, and then put it onto the Gurgoplex, and that was great fun. The first time I sort of really created that layout where you're only moving one key from each of your home positions, including with the thumbs. So you've got one key each side of your home thumb as well, and that was fantastic. So it gave me a real taste of what it's like to have a small layout. And then, of course, I had the issue with the USB port on the Gurgoplex, and that led me to the Ferris, which I actually built myself. So that was the first time I'd kind of gone down this road of soldering something a little bit and using controllers and all the rest of it. But that was a 34 key layout, so I adapted my layout and made that work. And I'm going to link to all of the files for these various layouts in the description as well, so you can kind of see that journey as time's gone on as well. So after the Ferris, I got involved with ErgoGen, which is this incredible bit of software, and KiCad that lets you build your own PCB for your truly custom layout just for you. And I've done a video on that, and I'll be doing more detail on that process as well, because it's absolutely amazing. I think it's what it enables you to do is fantastic. You can really build a keyboard exactly how you want it, and you haven't got to worry about filling up blanks and stuff. If you want to go for a smaller layout, you can just build a new PCB, and it's so cheap and affordable, and it's actually not that complicated to do. So that's all very exciting. So as you start exploring smaller layouts, you get to a stage where you're removing so many keys that you can't have every letter key on its own key. And the first thing that you might think about doing, which is what I did, was combos for those missing keys. So you would hit two keys at a time to get the equivalent of one of the other keys that's then missing, and that's pretty awkward for flowy typing. You can't really roll, and some of those, if you're rolling over a combo, you might trigger the combo by mistake. There's lots of sort of issues around that I think would fundamentally mean you couldn't ever type very fast using combos for some letters, and I didn't really like the feel of it either. I like the idea of rolling a whole word, and hitting a combo kind of, it makes it stumble. And obviously as you get to a certain stage, you run out of good combos that work for letters. So if you make a combo out of two common letter pairs and you're normally rolling very fast over those, then it will trigger as the combo, and that's a problem. So you normally want to make combos out of letters that don't normally come consecutively in normal typing. But I never really found that I was really enjoying combos, and I wanted to go a bit smaller as well anyway. So I ended up thinking of 2 layers for all of the alpha keys. So with 2 layers, it becomes possible to get really quite small. And in quite a short space of time, I'd gone down to 16 keys. I've stuck with the 16 for long enough now that I can make this video, and I've got pretty fast on it. I'm up to 80 words a minute, which I think is unbelievable. And I think it has potential to be even faster too. I don't think the layout's holding me at 80. I think it's just, I've got to get faster with the muscle memory. I think it can go faster, and I'll be super pleased if I can get this to 100 words a minute. So in terms of the feel of the keyboard, it's incredibly gratifying to type on a keyboard where you feel you're really barely moving your fingers. There's just those occasional movements, and once you start feeling the pattern of a whole word, you get this sort of idea in your mind of what's, when you type fast, you get kind of almost, it feels like you're memorizing a word at each time, and you just drill that pattern for the word, and that's how you end up typing really fast. You're not sort of thinking letter by letter, you're thinking of the patterns for each word, or at least the sort of chunks of letters that make up the words. And when you do that with a board this small, those patterns feel incredible. There's hardly any effort to them, and I'm really hoping that is also going to enable me to type really fast on this as well. So let's look at all the kind of features in this layout that make it work and make it possible to be 16 keys overall. So obviously, first and foremost, we're dealing with 2 layers. So you have the right thumb key is the key that switches to the second layer. Now I started off using a normal sticky layer key for this, and that means that basically you can just tap it, and then the next key you hit is on the second layer, and then it goes back to the first layer. Now the problem with that in reality is as I started typing on it faster, what I was finding I was doing was my thumb hadn't actually come off that sticky layer key by the time I would go back to hitting, say, a key from the first layer after that. So it would actually trigger 2 keys from the second layer when I actually only wanted 1, and then back to the first layer because I hadn't quite got my thumb off. So obviously when you start rolling quickly, that's something that is going to happen. So I asked on the Discord group if anyone had any solutions to this. So basically what I was needing to happen was, as soon as my thumb is down on that layer switch key, the next key that fires will force it back to layer 1, even if my thumb is still on it. And someone had the fantastic idea of using a macro for this, which is how that works. So I'd put the sticky layer switch as a macro, and that basically fires immediately, and it doesn't matter if I hold that key down, it's not still going to work as a second layer switch. So that actually solved the problem. It means I can roll through to the second layer and then back to the first layer as fast and sloppy as I like, with my finger hanging onto that key, and it doesn't cause any problems, which is exactly what I want. I kind of want all of the letters to behave that way, including full stop, comma, and apostrophe. So that's kind of my goal, that I don't have to worry about timing for any normal letter key and that basic punctuation. I can roll over those in any speed and any pattern, and I won't get any issues because of the timing, or holding down or releasing a key in the wrong time. So the right thumb is that macro layer switch key, and the left thumb is just space, but if you hold it down you get the meh key, which is fantastic for using with Keyboard Maestro on a Mac, and gives you so you hold that down and any key will then switch to another application. I use that as an application switcher, so basically super fast to jump between applications on the Mac with that meh key on the thumb. So obviously that holding down the thumb key I used in another layout, basically the sort of panic mode to get back to layer 1 if you use one of the toggles and you're permanently in one of the other layers. So you can hold that down and it won't output any characters, and when you release it, you're always back in the layer 1. If you're already in layer 1, all you've done is just push the meh key, which doesn't do anything by itself. So yeah, that's a really handy little setup for the left thumb, I find. So in the 16 key layout, I've come up with this system layer and taken that a bit further than I have in any other layout. And this is really, really fun, really fast, really great for working with the Mac. So with a 3 key combo, I can switch into the system layer and it stays in that layer then. So I can be mousing with one hand, and I can have the right hand on the right half of the keyboard where most of this system magic happens. So I can actually be mousing with my left hand, which is good because I want to try and alternate, using the trackpad, but I want to try and alternate the work between my hands a bit on the trackpad as well. So I'm starting to use the trackpad with my left hand and actually clicking with a combo on the keyboard with the right, and that really changes the feel of using a trackpad, I think, and that's a good thing to do if you think that using the trackpad is causing kind of problems in your wrists and whatnot. This is a good way of mixing it up a little bit and changing the pattern that your wrist is used to there. So in the system layer on the right hand, you've then got arrow keys and a command key on your thumb. So you can do arrows and thumb, and you can also do alt with your left hand as well. You can navigate the cursor in text very quickly in this layer. Now I've got some interesting things that happen when you hold down a finger on those arrow keys and the other keys in this layer. So copy and paste, for example, tap is a copy and then hold it down is paste. That means you can sort of select text, copy and paste, and then you can also switch applications just with the right hand here as well. So you've got the command key obviously with your thumb, so hold that down, and then you can hold down the key above that with your index finger, which is tab, and that will then give you the application switcher where you can then navigate that using the arrow keys and then release the switch into it. I've actually just added a Q key for quitting those through that as well, so all of that can be done with just the right hand, which is brilliant because it means you can do things like use the trackpad to select a bit of text, switch applications, copy and paste. If you're doing a sort of copy and pasting stuff from a document into a form or something, it makes that kind of workflow really, really, really good. So one of the key ways this 16 key layout works is by using home row mods, but not just for modifiers, for layers as well. So it works in the same way, which means you've got to hold that key down by. Now interestingly, what happens is you can actually do the roll very quickly, and so that's quite good. You don't have to sort of pause and then hit. You can roll as it's the release that you can delay, if you see what I mean. So that works really nicely, and I'm actually getting on really well with those sort of home row mod style layer switches, as well as for the modifiers of course as well. So in previous versions of these layouts, I think on the 36 key layout, I'd actually set things up so that most of the layer switching was a permanent toggle. So you would hit a key, you'd then be in that layer, you could do one or more keys, and then you would hit a key to come back to the layer before. So what I'm doing now is using the home row mod style switching basically for all the layers except for that system layer. It's also used for the system layer quite often, but I can toggle into the system layer, and I do that some of the time. That's the only layer I'm finding that I need to sort of go in and leave it in that layer. Everything else is working quite well just by holding down the home row mod style key set up for those layer switches. So when I first started using home row mods just for actual normal modifiers on the home row as they're kind of intended, I found it really tripped my rolling ability up. You know, it was triggering the modded version of a key when I was just rolling through the keyboard, and that was in QMK, and that's actually quite hard to set up. It wasn't obvious the best kind of settings for QMK in terms of home row mod style setup. Whereas with ZMK, it actually clarifies what you're supposed to do if you want to set this up, because obviously you want to allow for normal typing to be a roll, but you want to obviously be able to go in reasonably fast, so the key is setting it up so that there's a delay. Basically, if you roll on and off those keys within the delay, nothing happens. You won't get the modded version. You've just got to hold it down for long enough for it to trigger the modded version. So that applies not only with just my home row mods, but also with these layer switches, and it works really well. I can roll as fast as I like for normal typing, and I never get a false trigger of those layers. And like I said at the start, the idea, all of the keys that I want to roll over, I want to be able to roll on with no issues, are all the alpha keys and the basic punctuation. I'm not so concerned about being able to roll through to sort of random punctuation and symbols. I'm happy with the delay on that kind of key. Sometimes obviously I'm doing like open bracket, close bracket, semicolon, JavaScript, that kind of thing. And obviously for that I have a layer set up in such a way that I can just switch into that layer by holding my finger down on the left hand, and I can do all three of those by rolling very quickly on the right hand. So there are patterns sometimes where you work with symbols where you do want to roll, and this setup still allows for that. So dealing with capital letters is a big tricky thing with the 2-layer keyboard, I found. So the first thing I kind of set up was having the left thumb key turn into a shift key on the second layer. So you can go into the second layer with the right thumb, hit the left thumb, and then the next key is going to be a shifted version of a letter from the first layer. So originally I had the normal sticky layer switch on the right thumb. So that meant if I did hold that down, I could still hit shift on the left thumb, and the next key would be a shifted second layer key. If I released the right thumb, obviously it would bring me back to the first layer, and shift would apply to that. So I could get shifted letters from either of those layers, but of course that had that inherent problem with preventing rolling from one key from the second layer back down to a normal key. So after losing that, which I had to do because I definitely knew I wanted that rolling ability, I had to think of another way of getting capital second layer keys. And so what I did is create a new layer with all capital equivalents of that second layer, and then I was experimenting with ways of getting into that layer, and my first approach was actually to do both thumbs at the same time as a combo, and I just couldn't get that reliable enough. I could do it some of the time, but I'd miss sometimes and it would just give me a space, you know, and it wasn't reliable enough, and it's just too difficult to get the timing, because I had quite a short delay on that combo, because obviously there is a valid roll for those two thumbs as well, so I needed it to be a very short timeout to achieve the combo, and it was just too tricky to do. So what I ended up doing was changing the right thumb key in the second layer to go into the capital version of the second layer. So if I double tap the right thumb, I get capital second layer. If I do right thumb followed by left thumb, essentially I get shifted versions of the first layer, because the left thumb is just a sticky shift key. That works really well. I can now get capital letters reliably without having any combos or anything weird, just by double tapping the right, or rolling from right thumb to left thumb to get the capital on the first layer. So I mentioned before that the system layer on this keyboard has a click on a combo, and that's super handy. Enables you to click with the right hand and mouse with the left, and that's obviously particularly useful on a trackpad where it's quite easy to use with either hand. Obviously a normal mouse that's not going to work quite so well, but I do find that's a good workflow with the trackpad. Now, when I switched to the macro branch of ZMK to enable the macro layer switch on the right thumb, I obviously lost that mouse key ability to have a proper mouse click emulation on that layer. But I kind of worked around it to some extent by using a Keyboard Maestro hotkey shortcut, which gives me the click on that combo. The only thing is I can't get it to behave in the way that the emulation mode really worked well, by sort of clicking and holding, so I can't use it for clicking and dragging to highlight text and stuff like that. So that's a little bit of a shame. I'm again just waiting for that branch to be merged in with the main branch along with the macro mode. So I think once everything is in the main branch of ZMK, this stuff's really all going to start coming together. So in terms of the rest of the layout, we've got the different layers which you access with the Home Row mod style buttons. I'll show that on screen so you can kind of see how that looks, but essentially that's just normal layer stuff. There's not too much wizardry going on. I've got a couple of keys that have an on-hold function where you get a different key on hold, but mostly it's actually just single keys, for all of these things in those symbol layers. So that works really nicely. So there's a number layer as well, and that's also using the little finger as a Home Row mod style button, and that works fine too. So basically all 4 home keys have got a layer switching on hold. So the index fingers gets you into that system layer that I said with the arrow keys. I use that, just for quick, smaller things, but I've also got the 3-key combo to permanently put me into that layer. The middle finger is one of my symbol layers, ring finger is the other of the symbol layers, and little finger is the number layer. So you can hold any of those down to switch the board into that layer. So obviously you're mainly working with alternate hands here. You hold down the key on the other hand from what you want to predominantly do. So it's a little bit different with the number layer where the numbers themselves span both halves of the keyboard. You end up using the little finger to hold you into that layer, but you can then still do all the numbers even with both halves of the keyboard there. So I mentioned the ability to be able to roll through all of the main alpha keys, including shifted versions of that actually, as well as the basic punctuation, full stop, comma and apostrophe. So I've actually had to put the comma on the uppercase second alpha layer because there isn't really any space for it anywhere else. So that means for a comma I am hitting thumb twice and then the key to get the comma, whereas full stop's just a quick roll from the thumb to a Home Row key, and the same with apostrophe with the ring finger. And that's okay, that all works okay, but the double tap for the thumb to get the comma is a little bit too much. I think it would be nice to get that down to a single preceding key, but I can't really see anything obvious about how I'm going to achieve that at this point. So where I'm going to go from here, I'm definitely not going to go smaller because there are some obvious kind of points where I could optimize this, and it would be optimized by adding a key back. So I'm kind of making this trade-off of whether I want to add a key back to achieve a certain thing. So I've kind of worked out what I would add back if I was going to do this, and obviously weighing that up versus the headache of having to be moving the fingers more. But it would be thumb keys. I'm happy with the fingers. It would be a question of adding some thumb keys. So one of the thumb keys I'd like to add is a repeat key, because that would be super useful for things like control and a key in Vim, where you're doing page up and page down with the control held down and repeating that. To avoid holding down control all the time, you could use a repeat key, which would repeat the modified version of the key. So if I do control U for page up in Vim, I could then just hit the repeat key to go bam, 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 page up over time. So that would be super handy to have on a dedicated thumb key, I think. So I think the other thing that would improve things is having a dedicated thumb key to jump straight into the shifted version of the second alpha layer. And that would obviously then allow my comma to be on just a single key and into the comma because that's on that layer. So that would give all of my punctuation within a single key. So one thumb key obviously gets my normal second layer, which includes full stop and apostrophe. The other thumb key would get my shifted second layer, including comma. So that would remove this double tapping of the thumb, which I think you either move the thumb to get to a different key or you double tap it. It's not that obvious which one of those I would want to go for, I think. So I think basically a sort of improved version of this board, if you're happy to add more keys back to it, would be an extra key for each thumb, so 2 per thumb. One on the left hand would be the repeat key, and the one on the right would be this shift second alpha layer, including comma. So I think that might work quite nicely overall. So it's going to be really interesting seeing how fast I can get with this layout, because obviously I've got this idea of changing finger movement for a few additional key presses with much reduced movement. So overall, which is going to win, I don't know, in terms of maximum speed I can achieve on this keyboard. I think essentially as long as there's no penalty for rolling, and having keys overlapping each other, that kind of sloppy rolling effect that you get when you type really fast, as long as there's no issue with that, I think this has the potential to be really actually very fast, as well as extremely comfortable to use because it's just so small and your fingers are so minimal. I've just mentioned quickly this thumb position because obviously on the card that I've been practicing the 16 key layout, I have the thumb key on the same layer as the pinky, actually bottom row, so it's the one key below my home row, and it's very close. So as a result of that, my hands are really kind of curled up. And it's interesting, I vaguely remember my piano teacher when I was a kid saying I should have my hands in such a position that a mouse could run under them, which obviously suggests that that is quite curled up, which would bring the thumb quite close to the fingertips, I guess. So that's quite interesting, and I find it very easy to type like that. I'm sort of pushing straight down rather than having my fingers like that and sort of paddling down. I'm actually just straight down. I think, I don't know, it feels really nice. I actually quite like having my hand curled up like that while I'm typing. So I think when I build a specific PCB for this layout, I'm not going to move the thumb key much further away than it is now, although I'll try and do a bit more experimenting with that as well to try and figure out what I want there. So it's pretty amazing using this as a daily driver and up to speeds at 80 words a minute as well. You know, when I'm now starting to feel that I really have basic word patterns memorized into my muscle memory and I can just blast them out. It feels like I can get really fast with that. Now I'm not thinking about which key I'm pressing. It's just sort of just happening through muscle memory. It feels like I'm going to get quite fast here. So I'm excited to see that happening now. And it's the thing that's enabled that has definitely been switching that thumb layer switch to a macro so that I can roll through the second layer and back to the first layer. It does obviously mean I have to hit the thumb key so like if I was doing 2 keys in the second layer, I have to hit that thumb key to get back into the second layer for each one. So I'm adding a few more keystrokes, but with the ability to roll as fast as I like with any kind of overlapping going on through that. And I'm much happier with it that way round than having the system where it was you could hold it down and stay in the second layer, but that caused that problem with rolling through if you only needed 1 key from the second layer. So it's hopefully this has all made some kind of sense. It's a very complicated layout to try and explain, but super fun. I've really enjoyed this whole journey taking me up to this point. So the next step for me is to actually build this as a specific PCB using ErgoGen and KiCad with only 16 keys. So I can have no blanks and it'll look a bit tidier. It'll be interesting to see what kind of shape that ends up looking like. And I may end up playing with the position a bit compared to those key positions on the card here as well. So do hit the subscribe button for more videos on keyboards and technology and workflow and design and usability and all that fun stuff. And I'll see you in the next video.